So I'm just going to ask you, each of you, to just briefly introduce yourselves and talk about the company that you're organization that you're currently working with.
Yeah. I'm Britt Nilsen from Schibsted Media Group. I'm head of sustainability in Schibsted. And yeah, I presented myself yesterday, some of you. But we are working at the moment a lot on diversity and inclusion.
Hi, good morning everyone. My name is Hélène van Melle and I'm the Director of European Partnerships for TENT Partnerships for Refugees. This is a coalition of companies, leading global companies that are all committed to support refugees in some way. I have a background in business economics. I spent most of my career at Accenture in consulting and global HR roles, and then helped Accenture start up a foundation in the Netherlands. I am from the Netherlands, called the Refugee Talent Hub. That was bridging the gap between companies and refugees. And it's actually there that I was convinced and got convinced about the role that the private sector can play for refugees. And now I made the move to TENT Partnership.
Hi, my name is Archish and I'm the Executive Director and co-founder of R Ventures Foundation, where R stands for refugees, actually. And what we are trying to do is we are trying to support refugee entrepreneurs because we see that there's a huge gap between the funding requirements for refugees and other entrepreneurs. So we are trying to fill that in by investing in refugee-led businesses. And also we ran an incubator program in Amsterdam last year, in Netherlands. And we are planning to launch another one in Heidelberg in Germany in March next year.
So rather than start with the obvious reason why it's important for companies to work on social inclusion, social integration for refugees, because we want to stand in solidarity with people in different countries that have been displaced. Let's start with the business case on why it's important for businesses and why there is an actual business case and what can be learned. So, Britt, you've got some interesting insight there. Can you share with us?
Yeah, because I think we have to acknowledge that we're not only hiring for charity. We're hiring for future, we're hiring for, because it's good for business. And McKinsey has a survey that they did. They started in 2015, but it's been updated in 2017. And it says that if you get a diverse workforce for the ethnical diversity, they will actually have a 33% better profits than companies that don't. And this is even better if you have a gender diversity, which is profits will increase 21%. So this is really it's good for business.
And Hélène, are you finding that when TENT Foundation is working with the private sector, is this something that comes into conversation quite a bit, and how is that unfolding?
Yes, definitely. That is the same kind of conclusion. How we see, refugees are very productive workers. We see that the loyalty of refugees is very high. So there are different researches as well showing that turnover is much lower for refugees. So there are different reasons indeed for companies to hire refugees. That is one. But I think we can also take it at a broader level and really look at the impact it may have for brand and reputation for companies. So there also had different surveys done showing that brand perception and that the attitude of consumers towards brands or companies that are supporting refugees in some way is very positive. And even 38% of consumers buy a product for the first time because of their position on controversial societal or environmental issues. So I think the brand and motivation aspect is another factor that really may help decide companies to step into this. And I think there is also a strategic motivation, because by helping refugees in different areas in the world, as a company, you might help to stabilize the region, and we all want to prevent new violence, new flows of migrants. So there are different aspects, I think, around a business case, but there definitely is a business case to help.
Thank you. What about from an investment standpoint? Why should investors be investing in refugee businesses?
Yeah. So I think what Britt said, I think that makes a lot of sense, and especially the McKinsey report she pointed out. I've gone through that report as well, right? So you say that 33% of increase in productivity if you have more immigrants and refugees in the workforce. I mean, that's obvious, right? If you have people who have a different work environment, a different way of looking at things, a different way they've been brought up, when you put them in a new system, they see it in a completely different way, right? And they could point out those glitches and those ways in operation which we would never be able to see because we all have the same way of looking at things, right? So it is the same for investment, right? Because they bring ideas, they bring new perspective, they bring fresh energy, and that is what is required in the ecosystem, in the corporate world as well as the investment side, yeah.
So, and this is for all three of you. So what would you say are the biggest gaps? Where are the improvements? What are the improvements that need to be made within the private sector and among partnerships for more social integration, for more jobs and more opportunities to be available?
I think the problem is in the recruitment process. I think we have a lot of unconscious bias towards refugees and gaps in the CVs and so on, and overcoming some of those unconscious biases. I think is important, and also reading an application. It takes you 6 seconds to decide whether it's in the yes stack or in the no stack. When you have a recruitment meeting with a candidate, it takes you 4 minutes to decide if he's in or her is out. And this is because you have a lot of stereotypes, you have a lot of biases. Maybe you're not aware of them, really, but you are making decisions based on that you don't have enough information. You anticipate that the candidate is like this or like that, or that he thinks like this or cannot do this, but you don't ask. So this unconscious bias thinking, I think it's a lot can be done there to better the situation.
I think also if we take it one step before that moment, I think there is a gap as well in the commitments that companies are making at this point, and that we need to encourage more companies to step up, and that there are different ways to reach refugees. And TENT has identified actually 3 areas where we think that companies can play a valuable role. So that is indeed impact investment. So investing in refugee-owned or refugee-employing enterprises. But you can also think about service delivery, so adapting your goods or your services, and then in that way reaching more refugees. And Airbnb is a perfect example of that, and a valuable member of the TENT partnership as well. So, but you can also think the hiring is very, very obvious, but look at your supply chain, for instance. Where can you integrate more refugees or more companies from refugees into your supply chain? So I think also the thinking of companies needs to be more open, more creative, and that's also something that TENT Partnership wants to do together with them. But I think there's the gap as well, thinking more creatively about different ways on how to reach refugees.
Yeah, I think what Hélène said about TENT Partnership, there's this massive portfolio of companies like Airbnb, Starbucks, Facebook, and so on, who've joined hands to make a difference, right? For example, Starbucks has pledged to hire 10,000 refugees by 2022, I believe. I think it's great what they're doing, but the gap is in accountability. I was talking to her about this before. So you pledge, okay, you're going to hire N number of people, or you're going to give so much money to this cause, but who's keeping a track of it, right? You can come out with a pledge of saying, I'm going to invest 5 million, but who's keeping a track of that? And I think that is something that I want to ask her. How do you do that?
Yeah, so we are keeping track a little bit, but it's of course the responsibility of the company themselves. We ask companies to make an announcement publicly to as well focus on that responsibility about what their commitment is going to be. And we are now tracking and evaluating over time. But it's true, commitments should be made because there is an intrinsic motivation of the company by wanting to do something. And it's their responsibility to really implement it. And yes, in certain cases you might face issues, challenges. I think in every case you'll face issues and challenges. But if they're committed to work on it, it will proceed. And I'm very confident that, and I see around me that beautiful things are happening. So, yeah.
Do any of you have any stories or examples, case studies that you want to highlight that you in your initiatives that have shown really productive, positive results in the hiring, in the employment of refugees, whether it's through unconscious bias programs, whether it's through working with companies like Airbnb or Starbucks, Facebook? What's been some of the feedback that you've received from these corporations?
I can mention one company in the Schibsted Media Group, the Schibsted Distribution, which is the morning delivery of the newspapers. You get your newspaper on your doormat in the morning. And in addition to the newspaper, you can get breakfast, or you can get a parcel from someone, or a magazine, or they deliver many things. And this company, it's almost 1,000 employees who's doing these deliveries. And we have more than 100 nations. And this is people who normally will maybe not get a job, at least not that quickly when they come to Norway. But the thing is that we really haven't done anything to get there. So this is in kind of an organic way of having a diversity in that company. But what we need to do is to do some kind of internal communication and focusing more on that diversity to make those people proud and also make the rest of the organization value what they are really doing. Because if it hadn't been for them, we would have a really problem in that the newspapers was not, you don't get it in the morning. And this is 365 days a year. Yep.
Thank you. So one of the things that I'm hearing is the importance of accountability and companies making commitments. So a couple of years ago at Davos, there were a number of companies that pledged that they would make it a point to have more women in leadership roles and on boards. And then nothing happened, or at least I didn't hear about it. maybe there has been follow-up on the accountability bit. So how is this different? How is the refugee crisis and how companies that you're working with handling it different? And how can we continue to ensure that it moves forward and that accountability isn't? What are you saying to companies to stress the urgency?
I think, yeah, the refugee crisis has become much worse over the last few years. So we have not only seen an increase in the number of refugees being 15 million in 2012 and over 25 million today, and less people able to return home because fueled by the conflicts in Syria, South Sudan, Yemen, where no solution is likely to happen soon. But I think even more alarming, the duration of the displacement has increased. So there are studies showing that once a refugee is displaced for 5 years, then it's very likely that he will be displaced for more than 20 years, so meaning a generation. And I think that we have to really understand, and that's also why companies have such an important role to play, because we need to shift more away from short-term financial aid towards more long-term economic integration, and that's where companies need this vital role to take up and provide job opportunities. So I think by highlighting those facts and statistics, we need to work with more companies and ask them to stand up. And I think it's also important, if a group of companies is standing up and joining forces, to inspire others and reach others. So I think that's the strength of a partnership as well, and that's why we are grateful that great companies like Airbnb or MasterCard or Generali and IKEA are all standing up, Unilever, and speak up and try to inspire others to do more as well.
I can comment as well, because I strongly believe that what gets measured gets done. And in Schibsted Media Group, we have had a history of not having enough female in the leadership groups, but we have had targets for it and so on. But it's never been followed up, and not following up has never had any consequences. So now we had really big problems last autumn with the Me Too scandals and management groups that was set with the too few women. And it ended with we had to set targets for 2020 on the gender ratio. But the clue was, how should we do that when we hadn't succeeded previously? But what we did is we included it in the bonuses for the top management. If you reach this target, you will get this bonus. So I think if we really mean business with hiring refugees, we need to get it also into to measuring.
Mm-hmm. Hi, thanks for a very interesting discussion. I had maybe a question for all of you. I think let's think about hiring, for example. I mean, this to me is very important, but I'm also wondering, is that only kind of solving a symptom rather than curing the cause? I thought it was very interesting, Britt, where you talked about this incentive bias that we might have in hiring and selections. And you mentioned about some possible solution to take in that sense. Also to solve the situation in the long run. Could you give some example of some activities that firms can take in order to make this hiring process less biased or less disadvantaged towards the refugees?
We started that we have working on a diversity and inclusion policy, and saying what kind of company do we want Schibsted to be. So that was the starting point. And then we have worked on a recruitment policy, and that says how should you make sure that you get a diverse workforce. And one of the action points is that all recruiters, all managers, everyone that is involved in making performance valuing of their employees should have an unconscious bias workshop. And I've been holding these workshops all this autumn, and it's, people tend to think, no, I don't have unconscious bias. But going through that workshop is kind of an eye-opener. It's unconscious. It's not that you have a bad will, or that you, if you had the time to think really good through the problem, you would end up in another solution. But unconscious bias is that you get so much information and you have to do a quick review of that information and make a decision. And when you have to do it quickly, you are biased by things from the society, from your growing up, or whatever. And it's difficult to overcome your unconscious bias. But it says if you are making people aware of them, it's a start, and it can be off-teached. So I strongly believe in making people very conscious about how they make decisions. Make it on, and in Schibsted we are very conscious that all decisions should be data-driven. And when you have a recruitment, you have to decide beforehand what are you going to be your decision points. And every hire should go through exactly the same type of interview. You should always be interviewed by a man and a woman. You cannot let you be affected by okay, he had piercing, or he had a pink shirt, or whatever bias you have to overcome that.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this discussion. Please give a warm hand of applause for my panelists, and we'll move on to the next one.